G'day guys, and today I'm going to share with you some wisdom I've gleaned from a book that I've recently reread. The book in question is titled The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a counterintuitive approach to living a good life, and it was written by superstar blogger Mark Manson. I'll read you a paragraph from the blurb. For decades, we've been told that positive thinking is the key to a happy, rich life. Drawing on academic research and the life experience that comes from breaking the rules, Mark Manson is ready to explode that myth. The key to a good life, according to Manson, is the understanding that sometimes, quote, shit is fucked up and we have to live with it. The book speaks on many different topics, but what I want to focus on today in this video is the idea that life is full of suffering. What has always struck me as odd is people who cannot seem to grasp the idea that the world, and indeed reality, is filled with inherent suffering and pain. I imagine this is a result of the affluence of excess that we live in this Western world. We have so many material resources, economic opportunities coming out the arse. You don't really want for anything relative to, how we've been living for most of our life. We've always got to remember that we are still an ape. We're still a caveman. And just because we dress ourselves up in nice clothes doesn't mean we're not a caveman. And yes, while we think back to the 2008 global financial crash or crisis, that was pretty bad and job opportunities were definitely lowered, but you can compare that job market to the job market of the Stone Age and it's infinitely better. I don't think I've ever had a problem, dealing with the idea that life is full of suffering, or if I had, I was able to rationalize it to myself. And something to think about is things in life, not necessarily just humans, have different goals. Like when you're locked in a room with the tiger wants to eat you and you don't want to get eaten, and those conflicting goals result in suffering and pain. Either the tiger starves to death or you get gruesomely killed and eaten. And I think acknowledging that reality is full of suffering is really important for your mental well-being, because if you think that reality isn't full of suffering, or it shouldn't be full of suffering, then you're going to be constantly disappointed and upset with the world. Your expectations are going to be, unfulfilled at every stage. Every minor slight will enrage you to the point of insanity. I just read a really good quote in this book. Life is essentially an endless series of problems. And I think that's true because, everyone's got different goals, as I've said. When you're locked in that room, your problem is that you're going to be eaten, and the tiger's problem is that he might go hungry. So what you got to hope for, the book says, is don't hope for a life without problems. There's no such thing. Instead, hope for a life full of good problems. And what the book goes on to argue, which I found really insightful, is that your problems never go away, you just sort of exchange them for better problems. The example that really struck a chord with me was the gym. So when you think about the gym, what you're essentially doing is swapping out your problem of health goals, self-image, unfitness, that sort of thing. You swap that out for the problem of having to maintain a strict diet, getting to the gym, enduring the workouts, sticking to a routine and that sort of thing. But to me, I'd much rather have the problem of eating well and sticking to the routine and going through the burn. It is still a problem, but it's one that I enjoy. Now, when confronted with this information, some people may feel incredibly challenged to learn that life is full of suffering and problems are a constant and you will never, ever get away from your problems. You can merely exchange them. They might get a bit nihilistic about the whole thing. And so, obviously the question is, how can you be happy if suffering is inevitable and problems are a constant in life? Well, what this book argues is that happiness comes from solving your problems. And this is really interesting to me because it therefore makes happiness a form of action, almost like a verb. It's a constant activity that you have to partake in order to feel content. It's like eating. You constantly have to eat all the time, but no one seems to take a problem with that. But when you tell people that you've constantly got to do things to make yourself happy, I guess they agree with it, but they find it distressing. Like, if you don't swim, you'll sink. It's like, yeah, what do you expect? Of course. This is a good time to remind people that when you confront people with this idea and they are very challenged by it, it's good to be very empathetic, otherwise you can alienate them. Funny enough, this challenge, this information, is merely another problem that they can solve to make themselves happy. And an interesting note on solving problems is that the solutions to today's problems can actually lay the groundwork for tomorrow's problems. A good example of this, I feel, is getting a job. Now, before you get a job, you presumably have the problem of not getting a job. And when you achieve a job, when you get offered a job and you accept it, you feel very happy about that. But the job opens up a whole new realm of problems for you. You've got to get up on time. You've got to deal with shitty customers. You've got to deal with shitty bosses. The list goes on. And you do get this funny thing where people complain about the fact that they have no job, and then when they get a job, they complain about the fact that they have a job, etc., etc. Truly, life is a series of exchanging your problems for slightly better problems. But this shouldn't despair you, because happiness comes from solving problems. So if you engage with this idea that life is a series of exchanging problems for other better problems, you realize it's actually an exchange or a process of making yourself happy. To avoid this process, which is a problem in itself, is to deny yourself any source of becoming happy in your life, which will lead to dejection, depression, nihilism, you name it, and people will descend into it. On the surface, this sounds really cool, but I think we can all recognize that it's incredibly difficult to engage in this problem-solving behavior because it is very easy and very tempting to, deny our problems, project them onto other people, pass them off onto other people, or have an eternal victim mentality where, anything that challenges us is wrong and evil, etc., etc. And this plays out in the culture, it plays out in the politics, in the universities, as we've seen constantly. And it's a left and right thing. Like it's not partisan. Nowadays you've got left-wing advocates, wanting to ban certain books and things like that. But you've got right-wing people wanting to ban, Trump 45 shirts from Walmart, and getting up people for not hanging up Christmas decorations, the war on Christmas and all that bullshit back in the day. So it's not a partisan thing at all. It's a human nature thing because it is so easy and so tempting to not solve our problems but foist them off onto other people or deny that they even exist. The easy and tempting reactions of blame and denial give us a quick high and allow us to temporarily alleviate our anxiety about our problems. Now, highs can come in many forms. They can obviously be substance-based. The alcoholic drinks alcohol to relieve his anxiety about being an alcoholic, for example. But there can also be a high in the form of moral righteousness, when you paint the universe out as, horribly oppressing you, and in Nietzsche's slave morality, you are morally right or morally virtuous because you are oppressed. These highs, whether they're from a traditional source like drugs or from a more esoteric source like moral righteousness, play the same way. They are incredibly addictive, and you engage in these behaviors like any other addict to alleviate the symptoms of your anxiety about how your life is going and to stave off the come down, essentially, when you have to admit to your failings and seek forgiveness from other people. When we act out this behavioral pattern, our problems only get worse. They metastasize, they snowball, they grow. And the longer we avoid solving them, the more painful it is when we finally confront these issues. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.